Ladies and gentlemen, in just a moment you are going to hear the voice of a man who will tell you some tremendously important facts.
Welcome to the Reality Revolution. It is a wonderful day because any day I get to talk to Paul Selig is a wonderful day. And today I get to talk to the wonderful Paul Selig. The amazing Paul Selig is the channeler of a Melchizedek, a group of guides that he has documented in his many wonderful books, his most recent Resurrection. And I've gotten a chance to talk to him a couple times. Each time we go a little bit deeper about their amazing teachings, and it's wonderful to feel the effects of these teachings and to be able to come back and share them with Paul. So I just am honored to have him on today. Welcome to the Reality Revolution once again, Paul.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Well, how has it been since we last spoke? I'm sure that you're constantly channeling and getting new information all the time. So how's it been going?
Fine. You know, they completed another book in September. So that's book 11 that's been finished, and it'll be out in the fall, I hear. But no, things have been good, I have to say.
Well, I can only tell you that from my group, and we are experiencing the shifts and changes from the subtle little teachings that the guides have brought. Recently, we did a meditation focusing on the affirmation, behold, I am new, that you kind of have at the end. And there's some really amazing subtleties when, like with any affirmation, when you say it over and over and really try to get into its state, that's the real power of your channelings, that they have this ability to use language and use very simple words that just resonate for days and days and days.
Well, they say that the language that they use is encoded with vibration, and I sort of understood it at times as if you plug in certain coordinates on a jukebox and you expect a certain song to play. And the attunements, they call them claims of truth. They say what is true is always true. So you're not making this stuff true at the level of personality, which is a transient way of knowing ourselves, but it's always true at the level of the true self, or the monad, or the eternal self, or the God consciousness. So the claim, behold, I make all things new, which was a doozy, is really, I suspect, stating that the true self in its expression, or the monad in its expression, by nature of co-resonance, is claiming the world at a higher octave, because it expresses at that level, and the guides say, you know, God sees God in all of its creation. So it's a potent one, I agree.
Yeah, I really felt it. I think it had a certain effect. And they claim we're not making things better, we're making things new. And they have some very, very basic explanations afterwards that are just like, oh, you know. We've gotten used over time to saying, I know who I am, I know what I am, I know how I serve. And now we're saying, I know who I am in truth. Yeah. As you had said. And at first, that makes sense. When they start to explain truth and our relationship to it, those words really vibrate a lot more. And I think that's the amazing part of these teachings, is they take their time going over these teachings, and then suddenly this word, which before had meaning for us, has so much more meaning.
Yeah, they're pretty good at this, I think. I mean, the first book was channeled in 2009. And I sometimes think they've been unpacking that teaching and building on it ever since, because they say that they parse it out in a way that we can hold it, and that's hold it vibrationally. They can't bring us into too bright a room too quickly, or we're going to want to run from it. But I'm always curious about how they work, and I like that the work that they do is energetically palpable to most people. The books themselves are attunements, and the encoded text and the attunements, they work vibrationally. So if you're doing this yourself, you're going to get, if you plug in those coordinates, if you plug in I know who I am in truth, you're always going to align to that level of vibration, and most people can feel it. And as you continue to work with this stuff, it escalates. That just seems to be how it works.
Yeah, that was the metaphor that I really enjoyed that they used, that we would not bring you into a room that you could not see, a bright room.
Yeah,
We're gonna let you get used to the light
yeah,
before you go into that bright room.
yeah.
And to me that made a lot of sense, and
Uh-huh.
it goes with all of their teaching.
Mhm.
Is there, in your mind, is there another room beyond the upper room?
Yeah, I mean, they talk about the upper room, which they say is the octave of expression beyond the common field, the one that we know ourselves in. And they talk about the kingdom as being accessed through the upper room. And the kingdom, they say, is the awareness of the inherent divine in all manifestation. It's just the awareness of source energy. It's a level of accord. And they say ACCORD or ACHORD is on a piano, which is, I suspect, to remind us that everything is tone, everything is sound. And when they're working with us in these ways, they're supporting us in a higher alignment or a higher octave. They say that the upper room is the highest that we can hold while maintaining a body, while maintaining a form. They've called it or describe it as Christ consciousness, but I like the idea of the octaves, which they brought through early as an explanation. They say everything is in tone, and we're operating in a collective field that they called an octave with high and low notes, and everything we see and experience is in alignment within that octave or that structure of notes, which they say can be played in different orders. And then they say any piece of music can be transposed to be played in a higher octave. And the work that they do with us, they say, is basically transposition. It's lifting us to be able to vibrate or tone at the higher. And, and from there, I think there's more. So I suspect that they meet us in the upper room. I think that they don't need bodies, so they can, meet us in this sort of middle ground of availability, and they can bring us there so that we can begin to explore perhaps what exists beyond it.
I just got done reading a book by this guy, was a genius, and he had a very similar experience. He was channeling a group, and they would never really. He would ask them, "What's your favorite song? Can you at least tell me your
Yeah,
favorite song?" And they would be like, "Well, that's not important. We have work to do." But
yeah.
eventually it was like, "What a wonderful world." Have you ever asked them questions like that, or do they have a sense of humor? Do you like, "Hey, what's
Yeah.
your favorite song, or what's your favorite movie, or anything like that?"
They don't operate. I mean,
Yeah.
I think they've used the word computer maybe twice in 10 years. They still call it the television. So, I think that their understanding or interest in pop culture is non-existent. I really do. I don't think they could care less about that stuff. And it's not that I'm not curious, but it feels like it's beside the point. I mean, honestly, there are questions that I suspect if I had more willingness to receive the answer, and I'm hesitant around a lot of things to go there. If they want to go there in their instructions, they will go there. Occasionally, I have no mathematical mind or scientific mind at all. Earth science, I think, was as far as I got. I think I was probably stoned through all of biology in high school. Don't remember a thing. But occasionally, because I have people who come to my groups or come to the live streams who are physicists, and they're saying, well, your guys are talking about string theory in such and such way. I don't know what string theory is. I don't read the stuff. I know it's there. And the guy, and I say, well, they're not going to answer this. And then they go bang, and they say, oh, yes, we will. And then they go there. But for the most part, I don't invite stuff because my job is to be, the radio for a teaching. And they show up prepared for their teachings. They show up prepared to lecture. They show up prepared to dictate for books when they're doing a book. And the rule with the books is nothing is edited. I mean, maybe 3 words gets changed in an entire volume of, 300 pages of manuscript. And that's normally because I was speaking too fast, or I added an S to a word that didn't need pluralization, or I transposed 2 words because I'm taking dictation. That's my job. When I move into conversation with them myself, It's generally because I'm reseated when I channel, but I'm present. And if they say something that I find confounding, I'll say, they'll now say, Paul has a question. In the early days, I would just mentally ask the question and they would answer it. And then people would say, why are the guides talking about this? And they were talking about it in answer to my question. And so now they'll frame it. They'll say, Paul has a question, Paul is interrupting. And they'll either say, and we're going to take it or not. And then, but mostly they're there for their own agenda. And because I'm the channel and it's kind of hard to work through me if I'm busy interrupting, they have to manage some of that. But I don't know that they have a favorite song. I mean, I think that the idea of language, which I'm only beginning to understand what they mean by this, you know, the guides say when you know something, when you truly know something, there's actually no language attached. You just know it. And then you attach language to it. And sometimes I wonder if what I'm actually hearing isn't just energy that's then translated into language. You know, I read for people when I work psychically, you know, that don't have English as a first language, and or they have parents in another country who've never spoken English, and they ask me to tune into their parents, and I can hear the parents, but I don't speak Chinese, I don't speak Russian, you know, so if the parents are there, I'm still getting the impressions or the knowing of what I'm able to receive at a level of language. And so I suspect there's some other thing at play. So I don't know, you know, and I also don't know with music, because they speak about music a lot. I mean, they say everything is in song, everything is in tone, everything is sound and vibration, and they celebrate that. But, you know, if somebody said, and occasionally people will do this when I channel, like, what do your guides say about this current event that I happen to be interested in, or this celebrity scandal? It's like, that somebody else gets that stuff, you know. I just, it has nothing to do with what they bring through. If there's something that they want to address, they'll address it. It comes through more in readings. You know, I don't do world predictions, but the guides have been pretty adept at sort of foretelling the structure and the lessons of a period that we're about to undergo. And when I have gotten that stuff, generally, you know, I had an exorcist years ago who was trying to open up a business in Lower Manhattan and wanted to know if he was going to be able to make the rent, I think, for the month of October, and the answer was no. And he said, why wouldn't I be able to make the rent? And the answer was, well, there's going to be a terrorist attack in Lower Manhattan. And there was, and the rent wasn't paid because everything shut down in Lower Manhattan after 9/11. But I don't think I would have gotten that, because I wouldn't have been looking for it. Now, there wouldn't necessarily have been a reason for me to know it in advance.
Are you always channeling the guides, or do you have other entities come through? You've even said you've communicated with when you're talking to somebody, their dead parents or relatives.
I'm not a spiritual medium, so I'm not talking to the dead. But you know, if you haven't talked to, I mean, it happens, but that's not what I say that I do, because I'm surprised when it happens. So if you ask me about your Aunt Alice, who's been dead for 20 years, I can get her, but I may well get her as she was when she still had a body and that level of vibration. So if you still have a body, and this is true because I've been accurate, I'm told, with people who've been in comas, their parents have verified, you know. I remember reading for this woman once, and she had a daughter who was in a coma, and the daughter kept acknowledging her bodice, her collar on her nightgown, and the mother said, yeah, she had a bedazzler, and she jeweled the nightgown of her daughter. And, you know, so I'm going, well, that's really interesting, but she still had a body. What I'm really good at, seemingly, because people come to me and I do this publicly often, is a kind of mediumship for the living. So if you haven't talked to your brother in 5 years and you give me your brother's name, I can step into your brother and hear him. It's really a simple thing. I think of myself as a radio. So when I'm channeling, I'm tuned into the station that is the guides, and they're going to come through. If I'm reading for you, I tune into you. You're the station that I'm picking up on. I get to feel what it's like to to be as you. And then and from you, I can go to the people in your lives and get accurate information.
How much do you think that comes from your experience getting and teaching acting and drama when you were?
I never taught acting.
Oh, you never did?
No,
Okay.
no.
For some reason, I remember reading that in a biography. So
I was a playwright.
I've met actors, a
Yeah.
playwright. I met
I was a
actors that have
playwright.
that ability. They tune into other people, and it's almost
Yeah,
like a radio.
it is. I mean, I think it's comparable. I really do. And when I was a playwright and I was young and self-destructive, but I didn't know. And somebody asked me this maybe 15 years ago or something. How did your playwriting inform your channeling? And I said it didn't. It's a totally different life. Totally different life. Totally. And then I thought about it. And when I was 21 and writing plays, I used to put one piece of music on loop on the CD player and play it for hours, same song, same piece of music. And I would sort of recede and I was inducing trance. I didn't even know what a trance was. And then I would just write whatever wanted to come through. And that was my initial writing. Where I think I developed more was teaching college. And when I taught college and I taught writing, I just would know what people needed, and sometimes I'd see little lights go off over their head and I'd say, you over there, you had an idea. What was it? I'd say, how do you know I had an idea? Well, it's because a little light bulb went off over the head. I mean, it was, but I used to lecture at NYU, and I found maybe 10 years before I quit that I just was like, the idea of using lecture notes became repulsive to me. I just didn't want them. And I just used to let it rip and it would flow. And if it was flowing, it was wonderful. And I knew when it was flowing. And that's not a lot different in a weird way than channeling. The difference is that I show up for each channel lecture knowing that my job is to step back and get out of the way. I literally don't know what the topic of the lecture is going to be or the focus is until they say it. I don't know what the titles of the books are until they give it to me, and that's in the dictation for the book. I think once I knew the title ahead of time because the publisher asked for it and they gave me something, to work with. But that level of, it's clairsentience to be able to work that way. That's really what it is. It's a psychic ability. People call themselves empaths. This could be like being a bit of an empath on steroids, because it's not only do I feel what's going on, I can tune in and find out why. And I can be given language or a solution to it, because you can tune into people at different levels. So if I'm tuning into somebody who just got dumped by their lover and I can feel all that pain and I can hear what they're going to need to get through it, I can also probably access them at a level where they'll explain what happened, what the lesson was, and how they're going to be able to move through this and when, because that's information that's available. And I like that work for me because in a strange way, because when I channel, I'm also taking questions. When I do public events, when I do live streams, the guides will lecture, they'll open it up for questions. A third of the questions are on the teaching, and then the rest of the questions are usually about saying, my teenage daughter's in trouble, and her name is such and such, what do you get? And I tune into the mother, and I tune into the daughter, and I can broker something. But that stuff is provable. I've never met the daughter. I've never seen the daughter. I don't know who knows, if you say I'm having problems with my boss and I give you your boss's name, it's the same deal. There's no way you can't know it. But this stuff gets verified all the time. And I often start to look like the people that I step into, which is a form of sort of physical mediumship, or it's another level of just sort of veiling the self or taking on the personality, and it's interesting. But what I like about this stuff is it verifies for me the channeling, which is just, that's far out, just taking dictation, which is what I do now.
Well, you would suspect many of the great writers in our history have done something similar. They've stepped back and let this stuff
Absolutely.
flow through, right? It's real
Absolutely.
talent to be able to step back.
No, there's two different. I mean, I make a distinction about it. You know, Shirley Jackson, the author I was told wrote her story, The Lottery, in one sitting with no edits. It just came out of her. And I make a distinction because I know I had the worst case of writer's block of anybody I've ever met in my life. I mean, and it was humiliating. I was chairing a master's program at one point at Goddard College. It was painfully embarrassing to feel so stuck. And the irony that these books are delivered in weeks or 2 months, usually at most, of sittings without editing, it's not lost on me. It's like the pendulum swung in the other direction. What was I saying though? I digressed and I forgot what I was saying.
We were talking about how some writers out there are stuck
Yeah.
tuning. Yeah.
So this is the big difference. Channeling, in my opinion, is stenography.
Right.
That's it. You don't get to go back and fix it. You don't get to pretty it up. You don't get to take out the clause that might be offensive to somebody. If that's how it comes, that's what you get, in my opinion. And I may be in the minority here. Channeling is dictation and stenography. It's not creative writing. I do think that there's a level of skill and perhaps craft that is employed in channeling, which I feel is developed. I worked for a long time. Initially, I was hearing fragments. They didn't start lecturing through me. I'm 61 now. I was 48 when they started to lecture, and that was when I quit smoking. And I was channeling since I was in my early 30s, But the lectures were a whole other animal. And all I knew was I was talking more. I wasn't that interested in what they were saying. I was interested in the energy that would come through with it. Now, inspiration is divinely given, I believe. At whatever level, you can be plugged into some really dark stuff and creating really interesting work, which I choose not to do now. When I was a young kid and a bratty playwright and everything was about pain, maybe. That's what you do when you're 21 and long-suffering and you drink too much. I mean, that was who I was. But the thing about inspiration, in my opinion, is you get to go back and craft it. So, and that's different. That means you go back and you edit and you shape and you do all those things because your name is on it. And I have this weird thing now that there's 10 books in print that have my name on the cover that I really don't feel authorship over. I really don't feel. Somebody said, I really loved your book. I said, well, that's nice.
Yeah.
But when I was my own stuff, boy, did I care. Oh my God, I cared. If you thought my work stank, I was horrified. I was miserable. It's not the same,
Well, I've got that impression from interviews with when we've talked and other times, and I can still feel your presence there. Mm-hmm. You're contributing. There's no way. There's no way these teachings could have come through. You're still talking. There's an interaction going on.
I'm a collaborator, yes.
Level, I want to thank you for that. I mean, you deserve all the credit, even though you're just a stenographer. There's no other way that these teachings could have come through other than somebody with your particular skill set. Because if I had these voices coming through, I would be talking all the time. I'd be interrupting. There's a reason.
I do that. I've done my share of that, and I still do. But I've gotten much better. I just finished a week-long retreat in Costa Rica. I'm much more present. The channelings are the channelings, but when the questions come, I'm more present because I'm able to interpret now, because I do things like have this conversation with you where you ask me to say what I think about things.
Right.
When I first started doing events, I would say, hi, my name is Paul. I would tell a 5-minute backstory of how I started doing this. And you really wouldn't hear from Paul until the end of the weekend. And I'd say, I hope you had a nice time. Thank you very much. I was so not willing to show up as myself for that. And that was a good thing. However, I'm not the teacher of the books. I'm not that one. I may be the student in the front row and the guy in the chair who's being utilized to deliver it. So I'm there, I'm present, but I consider myself a student of the work more so than the teacher. And I find it very risky when people who do the kind of thing I do start mistaking themselves for the message, because then you're in a tricky place. You know, I didn't come into my spiritual life in any way that was comfortable or easy or polite. It was a train wreck for me early on. It was not easy and it was not fun. I was newly sober. I was starting to see lights around people. I, knew there was a God after a life as an atheist. I just kind of knew it. And you couldn't get me past that. Everybody thought I was just, poor Paul, he became a whatever. And I really hadn't. I just found myself on this path. But who I thought I was supposed to be collapsed over a period of time. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't polite. I admire these people who just open up like tulips and, oh, it's all wonderful and it's rainbows and unicorns. I mean, I was literally next to homeless, for the first few years of my path. And was very, very fortunate that there were very kind people in my life. I was always watched over. When I look back on it, it's extraordinary how close to the edge I probably was. So that's my thing. And it's because of that I accept that what I do is unique. But I have to say, the person who's the crossing guard, the lady who's the crossing guard at the school intersection may have the highest spiritual calling of anybody. You know what I mean? It's just not, it's not supported that way. And I learned that early on when I was first teaching, and I met people, who were teaching in the public school system in New York and the Bronx, when the Bronx was South Bronx, and it was rough. And these people were so far evolved. They were so committed to service. They were so in deep compassion for the needs of their students. That was humbling for me. Yeah. My privilege got shattered,
One thing I'd like to get your interpretation of the guide's teaching, something that there's it's almost a paradox I struggle with in teaching in my own channel. Is we're in an economy, a capitalist economy. People need to make money. People need to survive. The guides talk about it. But when, in some cases, when I'm talking about, making money using on a spiritual level, people are offended by that because there's a part of them that's been taught that that's not spiritual. And then there's, in other cases, I've come to recognize if I want to be of the greatest service, I need to have resources. Money is a resource I can use to provide service to people. So what is your interpretation of the guide's teaching and how we interact with money in this economy, in this world that we're in?
Well, I mean, it's a lot. There's a lot that they've said about this over the years. And the reason I'm probably never going to be channeling on cruise ships is they're not telling people how to make more money, or how to get the hot boyfriend or girlfriend or, more followers on Instagram. I mean, it's just not it. But the teaching is very simple, and it's not just the guide's teaching. It's Metaphysics 101. Yeah. It's source. It's knowing source. And knowing that source is what you're accessing, and that it shows up in different ways. And then the limitations that we place on that are, in some ways, our own, because my guides have said we're always getting what we expect, like it or not. Now, they've said this a lot, and they talk now a great deal about moving to what they call the upper room as a level of vibration, and then just becoming receptive to what is, because you're not running around trying to get stuff all the time. You're trusting source to provide, and this belief that if there is a source or God or whatever you want to call it, why wouldn't it know what you need? Why do you have to rush and cut the line to be first to get it, or get this before somebody else does, which is the old system, and it doesn't work. I mean, when I understand the whole idea of separation, which the guides talk about, sometimes I get the sense that it was created by us because we didn't trust source. You know, I've got to hoard the most because I may not have enough to get through the winter if I don't, and then go screw everybody else, which is the result. It becomes selfishness, it becomes greed, it becomes all these other things. Early on in the teaching, the guides would say this thing, which I now find ironic. You know, I was a college teacher, I didn't have any money. They said, you know, there's nothing wrong with a house on the hill, somebody gets to live there. But why do you want it? And the why do you want it seems to be somewhat imperative. They say if you want to be the envy of your neighbors, you're creating in fear. And the action of fear is to claim more fear, and every choice you make in fear is going to get you more of the same. And look at that. Look at the trajectory of that. I actually live in a house on a hill now, which I find ridiculously funny, that I never would have chosen for myself. You know, it really did happen. But the idea is that when we become open and receptive to possibility, more can be added. But the guides often say we're always getting what we expect. We're always ordering off of the menu that we think we're allowed to order from. And if that menu is highly dictated by a belief in lack, well, we're going to continue to do this. I said this in an interview recently, you know, I did this work in my apartment in New York City, where I lived almost all my life. With a little basket, people would put $10 in on a Wednesday night or a Sunday night, whenever the group met. Sometimes 20, which was a big night. And I could buy a pizza after, you know? So you're frozen, so I don't know if we're still broadcasting.
I still hear you.
So Brian, okay, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay. So, you know, but I said I was doing this work. Sometimes 3 people showed up for this group. Mm-hmm. And now I have many, many people who come. But if there were 3 people putting $10 in the basket, I would still do it.
Yeah.
You know, that's it. You show up anyway. It's not about trying to become successful at something. It's really about the privilege of showing up, I think. I do think if you do what you care about, if you're in a position to do work that you care about, it's a lot easier. You know, because I've had jobs I just hated and couldn't do. But I don't think there's anything wrong with abundance. So I think that's secular. And I think that there's a way to make anything wrong if you want to focus it. You know, the guides I talk about giving a lot. Mm-hmm. And, you know, because I just lost weight, I just, this enormous black garbage bag full of clothes that I'm going to give to whoever needs it, you know. And the guides have said, you know, people like the New Agers will say, well, they created their lack or they created their poverty. There's also systemic problems that support that, which we're accountable to because we're party to their creation, whether we like it or not. The guides say we're always in accord, vibrational accord, with everything we see. Manifestation is everything you see. It's not what you want to get. I'm going to go manifest this. Well, you manifested the challenges too. And they can become opportunities when you look at that. But, you know, if you've got it, you got to share it. I think it's that simple. It's about overflow. And that's key, I think, because if not, you're going to lose it. You know, that's how I see it.
The big thing that I come away from resurrection is, you know, people talk all the time about separating from source, but I really felt like with those words that I made a declaration that I am no longer separate from source. And when I said that, you know, I think it's later in the book, like close to the end, I could feel it. Like I could really understand it. I could assimilate this to this teaching that a lot of what I'm going through in the world is this separation from source. And I could feel slowly, just like the water being opened, I'm connected again to source.
That's great.
Such a simple teaching, but it's very, very profound. And I've said it, I've read books, I've said, oh, we need to connect to source. I didn't understand what that meant.
Yeah.
So many levels to that. Sometimes we speak in cliches in spiritual world, but really it's a lot more than we think.
The guides have said that the only real problem we face, humanity, individually and collectively, is what they call the denial of the divine. That's it. And, and they say it again and again and again. What you put in darkness, who you put in darkness calls you to that darkness. which is again a teaching of energetic accord. The irony is that we're not separate, but we have accrued all this evidence to think that we are, and then we buy into the evidence of it. And so the guides have said, you know, we're not inventing the upper room. They say it already exists. It exists. It's with us always. And there is an aspect of you and of me and of anybody, they say, that is already expressed there. And that's what you're aligning to, the part of you that already knows. The part of you that doesn't know itself as separate because it can't know itself as separate.
Right.
You know, that's how I understand it. So I'm happy to hear that you had the experience with the book, because I think that's the intention of the book.
So now after resurrection, it's hard to imagine where we're going to go next. I'm very excited about the places that they're going to take us next, because we've climbed a mountain through all of these different teachings, and it feels like we reached the top with resurrection. But I suspect there's probably a whole other mountain, as now that we're connected to source. If you follow these teachings, we're going to learn how to live in this new world where we are not separate from source. And that is an ongoing teaching, right?
Well, Resurrection's the first in a trilogy that they're calling the Manifestation Trilogy, because they're talking about, I suspect, the affect or the effect of these teachings as form. You know, God is form, source, and all that stuff. But they've already dictated the second book of the trilogy, which they're calling the Book of Innocence. And it's about reclamation of the monad as innocent. It's really interesting stuff. And dense, I have to say. But they're talking a lot about memory and history in the Book of Innocence, because they say that our understanding of ourselves and all of the history that we've accrued individually and collectively is tainted with the idea of separation, which was always a lie. So if I think back to anything, my idea of God, whatever that is, source, is still tainted with the belief in separation. My idea of who I am as a person or what I went through was all incurred in a reality that was born in separation. It's like, imagine you've always been swimming in a chlorinated pool and all you know is chlorine. That's it. So every memory of swimming or being is informed by this thing. So what they began doing in Book of Innocence is reclaiming or realigning us to history and memory beyond the taint of fear, which that is the basis of separation. So it's real interesting stuff. It's I don't remember it, because I remember about a third of what comes through me, and I probably won't really read the book until I'm doing the audiobook, which is when I sit down and have to go through them. So yeah, and I don't know what the next one is. I have no idea. And I don't think they're going to start that until the summer, and I hope they don't, because I'm going to start bleeding out my ears if this continues. It's just so much stuff.
Well, there's still a lot of mystery left in these books as to what is the afterlife. Is it reincarnation? Are we in a simulation? They leave that mystery for us. They're slowly revealing it, and it's obviously it's a lot more complicated than what my mind tries to. It tries to create definitions for what's going on with what they say.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because you said is it I don't know. They go where they go.
Right.
I don't think they're there to give us the sexy info that we want.
Right.
You know, the stuff that's kind of hot, and maybe they do, maybe they will, but I don't think that's it. There are a lot of people writing about the afterlife. The guides have talked about it, but it's not their subject. They have said, they do talk about time more and more as a construct. The true self, or the innocent self, the monad, whatever you want to call it, knows itself beyond time and space, but is with us in time and space, but is the eternal self that isn't bound by all of these ideas, including death. So they do get into this stuff. But it's funny, you said, like, is this a simulation? It's interesting that if you look at the language of metaphysics or the occult, it tends to be steeped in the science of the day, that anyway, like table tapping, once for yes, two for no, and all the whole spiritualist movement in the 1800s. That was at the same time as the telegraph, and people were tapping answers, and now everybody talks about, I received a download, because that's the language of the moment. So we're always working with this, because I suspect it's the best language that we can offer. The guides have said that they don't speak in the terms of science because our understanding of science is going to be so altered in the coming years, it's going to be passé, but it's not going to be relevant. But they speak in music because they say that's an eternal language. So who knows?
I love that answer. It's still something that we as human beings can't help but think about.
Yeah, of course.
I get the impression that they are implying sometimes that when we talk about separation, I'm not separate from you. You and I are the same person. We're all the same person. So an afterlife would be one. My individual identity is limited to this existence. And the more and more I read about it, I'm open to accepting that I'm not individualized like I think I am.
Well, there's an aspect of you that is, which is the personality self, which knows itself in separation. And there's an aspect of yourself that knows itself in union, and we chose to incarnate and have an experience in a body with other people. And the guides say it's really helpful to know what your children's names are and, where you work, so you can get to work and pick up the right kid when you go pick them up after soccer practice. It's really helpful to have this personal history. It's useful stuff. But it's not who we are. One of the very first things that I heard early on and I always have to say, 99% I heard this in channel because I didn't understand it. I was having a rotten time. But I wrote this down and stuck it in a slip of paper, and I heard, freedom will come when the throne relinquishes its king. And I thought, what the hell does that mean? But it's the essence of the teaching, which is who sits in the throne. Is it the personality self, who only knows itself through historical data and thinks he's what his parents told him he was, or what the culture says he should be, or all those things? Or are you the aspect of yourself who truly knows beyond age and gender and career? People in the guides use this claim, I know how I serve in truth, and everybody in the West still thinks they're talking about a career. And it's not. It's how you show up as your true self. How you express at the highest level is how you serve. It may be inclusive of work that you do, but it sure doesn't have to be.
So the interesting thing about what the guides are teaching is, as we talked about last time, is that we may reach a point where we're working as groups together. I have profound experiences when I meditate in groups.
Yeah.
We start to share in our essence, our energy. We become one individualized group.
Yep.
I'm seeing that more and more, and they started to talk about this more and more in Resurrection.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, collective mind, group soul, I don't know. They talk about these kinds of things. My experience of the work always is done in tandem with others. I can't channel unless there's somebody to listen to it.
Right.
The last number of books, 7 books maybe, were done in front of audiences. I mean, all of it were done, with people in a room or people in an online group that was formed to take the dictation. And so I'm aware of the collective experience of the work, and that's why I like to do live events, because I like being with people who are doing it. It's an extraordinary feeling to move into a shared awareness of this stuff. And I think what's useful about what you're doing and when you work with others is that some of the questions fade because you're in the experience of it. And when the guides work, sometimes they'll tone through me. I mean, like this song, the sound, and have people join. And what they say that they're doing is they're creating a level of resonance that everything can be aligned to, where the work can be done through vibrational accords, so people can be lifted to the level where things can be moved that might otherwise be, more challenging. So they do talk about this, and they've said many times in the last few books, humanity has decided at a collective level that you're going to make it. We're going to make it. And that's a very positive thing. And that seems to speak to the idea of a collective soul of a species. I mean, they've said, a community has, I don't know if they've said soul is the right word, but they've said a community has karma, a country has karma. We all have these things. And when I hear that we've decided collectively, that means that at a higher level of resonance, we've all said, yeah, because if we keep going on the way we've been, we're going to probably blow ourselves up. And we don't need to do that to learn the lessons. And I hope that's true, because that's what they say.
There's a definite battle, because it feels like with my small self and my ego, I'm separating myself from the collective just as much as I'm separating from the group. So that's like my prison guard. If I can, the ego is the prison guard that's keeping me where I'm serving just myself. I'm serving, and I'm receiving only for myself. And so from the teachings, I get this feeling that I need to move beyond this small window of my smaller self to receive and share with the larger collective.
Well, I think that's done. You see, when they say things like, the true self knows and the small self thinks, there's nothing wrong with thinking. We all think. But it's not knowing. If you understand, or if I understand, that there's an aspect of all of us that is that aware, is at that level of knowing of who it is. They say you can't know who you are without knowing who others are as well. It doesn't work that way. It's not, aha, I'm the one who knows now and nobody else is. That's just the ego creating a trap out of this stuff. But I think it's not as hard as we make it, When my old 12-step days, they used to say, look for the good or the God in everybody. It's not hard to do that. It's not convenient, because we want to be right or we want to make other people wrong. And there are tips. The guides I work with say, self-righteousness is always the small self. And you go, oh, there I go again, So I have an ego. We all have egos. I just think I think it's there. I don't think it's a bad thing. I just think we've confused it with who we are, and that it's part of what allows us to sort of have operative lives in the world. And there's nothing wrong with a healthy ego. It's probably better than walking around saying, oh, I'm a piece of crap all day, because I spent many, many years doing that, and it didn't get me much.
Right. There's seemingly a distinction between, the self-confidence and then ego, and then the ego, right? But
I don't know. I mean, I was thinking this morning, because I live in the jungle now. I live in a rainforest. I'm learning how to drive. I have a lesson after this interview at my age, and I'm scared of driving. But when I look back at the last couple of years in my life, I showed up willing to take on things that I didn't know that I could survive. And I have. And I thought, wow, you really showed up for these opportunities. And I felt good about that. Like, oh, I'm stronger than I would have thought I was. I'm maybe healthier than I like to give myself some credit for. Because I'm still attached to an idea of self that's damaged. I also think, though, that humility, is useful. It's necessary for this stuff, because it's one of the quickest ways to shut off, is to start thinking, it's the problem with a New Age. I am God. Well, yeah, but that doesn't mean that that's not about deifying the personality or the ego. That's the trap.
Right.
If you are, then you certainly know everybody else as the same thing, and that's humbling,
Absolutely. So it just everybody can go and check out events for Paul at paulselig.com. And it's just a real joy to step back behind the scenes and just talk to you. Um, you know, I don't define Paul as just a channeler, just a very nice person to talk to, and I'm sure that we could sit and talk about stuff beyond just the channeling because you've had so much life experience. But everybody wants to talk about your channelings because they're so powerful and wonderful. But I just want to make sure, and I speak for a lot of other people, to say thank you, because we know the work that you're doing, and you don't feel connected to it sometimes. I hear that expressed with your words. But we appreciate the service that you're offering, because it is a service that is unique and very tangible and important for a lot of people. And so you need to hear that. Somebody needs to tell you that. I'm sure you've heard it, but somebody needs to tell you that, because you could feel like a trained monkey, like, do your tricks where you start channeling. I get that, and I don't want you to feel like that we all appreciate your aspect of what you're doing, because there's no other way that this could have happened without you in particular, Paul. So thank you.
Very kind of you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And so everybody check out paulselig.com. Hopefully I get a chance to talk to you again with the next book.
Sure.
And I'll be reading it as soon as it comes out. And welcome to the reality revolution.
Thanks.
We return you now to your local announcer.